I've wanted to ask a question for a while about telos. How do we know telos is fixed? For example, a frying pan's telos might be to cook food well. But if a robber breaks into your house and you use the frying pan to bonk the robber, is it then fulfilling its telos in that situation as a blunt object? Is telos not relative? So, what's wonderful about this question is that it touches on something which I think a lot of people who talk about Aristotelian teleology miss this, and a lot of people who criticize or attack Aristotelian teleology also miss this. Like, they don't often grasp that Aristotle is not a simplistic, yeah, like everything has one purpose and that's its only purpose, right? And this is something that can get lost because when you're trying to get the concept of telos across a lot, you just say, well, things have purposes, right? There's such a thing as goals and ends, right? But actually, it's more subtle than that. So the frying pan example is a phenomenal example because, on the one hand, yes, you can regard, you have this object, the frying pan, and you can regard it in multiple different ways, right? You can regard it as an instrument designed to cook food. And when you regard it that way, it has an obvious purpose, which is food cooking, and that accounts for its shape and so forth. And that's, the final cause of Aristotle's four causes, right? What's the purpose of it? It's to cook food, therefore it's shaped in a certain way. That shape, the nature of the shape is the formal cause, the efficient cause is the art of making it, and the material cause is the stuff that there is, that is used to make it, like cast iron or whatever. But Brandon points out that in certain contexts and situations, a frying pan might be really useful for as a weapon, right? As a blunt instrument, and then it would become in that moment something else, right? And this gets into the role of consciousness in telos, right? You are, as a human consciousness, have a relationship to the object. And the relationship between you, the object, and the other people, namely the robber, right, determines the nature of the telos in that moment. And in fact, right, the question of telos, the question of purpose, is really intimately bound up with the question of what something is. What is the nature of a thing? And that question, what is this, versus what is the uh, purpose of it, are kind of two sides of the same coin in Aristotle, right? And so the Greek word that is often used here is katho, or kata, and this is like what in English when we say qua, that's what we're talking about with katho and kata. Like, I am a writer, and qua writer, my purpose is to, compose sentences. But I am also a man, and qua man, my purpose is to, glorify God and enjoy Him continually, right? And so you can regard things from certain perspectives as certain things because we live in this world of matter where everything is mixed up, right? That one being can be a man and a husband and a father and so on and so forth. And so we regard we regard people in different ways in different situations, and that engagement between our consciousness and the world um, determines how we should understand a thing's telos in a given moment and in a given situation, because you're regarding it as a certain type of thing. So, for instance, you might say, I'm a flautist and I'm a husband, right? And qua flautist, my purpose, my telos, is to play the flute as well as possible. Qua husband, right? My purpose is to support and support my family. To remain faithful to my wife, to remain, to serve my family and so forth. And those might all be true. Now, there's one more element to this, and that is a distinction which obtains very much in Aristotle between essential things and things that are kata sum bebekos, which is according to accident. It just so happens that at this time, right? So the frying pan that's being used as a blunt instrument, it happens to be that this is also matter, right? Which is being used, right, appropriately in this moment as a blunt instrument. But somehow that's not essential to what it is, right? And why do we know that? And here's the kicker, right? The telos of the frying pan as a blunt object does not have what I would call explanatory power. That is, we can't, by referring to its goal as a blunt object, explain why it's shaped the way that it is. Because actually, if it had been designed to hit somebody over the head, it would have a very different shape, right? Its telos as a tool, as for cooking things, does explain, right, why it's flat on the bottom, why the maker created it in a certain way. And so that is essential to the tote ein enai is the Aristotelian phrase, the what it is to be a frying pan. And so when you set out to define a frying pan, you don't make reference to its possible use as a blunt object, even if that would be perfectly appropriate, right? You make reference to its purpose as designed. And so everything that is designed, consciously designed with intention, right, has an essential telos, which can help us explain why it is the way it is. And so the great question about human beings is, do they have an essential telos, which is definitive of them by nature? Um, in addition to all the different things that they can do, because we can do many, many things that are teleological, right? And yet, can those be folded into an essential telos, which defines what we are? And that question does hinge upon: are we created like the frying pan? That is, are we shaped with a purpose in mind? And if we do have this eudaimonic purpose, this purpose to glorify God and enjoy Him continually, because we were made that way for a by a conscience, by a consciousness, right? Then we have a definitive telos which has explanatory power with regards to everything about us, with regards to our hobbies, our desires, our loves, our petty interests, our more important passions. This, just like the telos of the frying pan to cook food, explains everything about it in a way that its purpose as a blunt instrument does not, right? Our telos as enjoyers of God explains everything about us, even if, right, we have other subsidiary purposes, right? It folds those purposes into itself. And this is very much part of Aristotelian teleology. You can find the discussion of the flautist. I took that from the Nicomachean Ethics. I believe it's in book 2. I just lifted that description of the auletes, the one who plays the aulos. But you can use this tool. It's a very powerful tool for understanding teleology more deeply than just like, oh, this thing has a purpose, right? It all has to do with consciousness and relationship, right? When you incorporate consciousness and intention in design into your teleology, you come to understand like that even though things do have multiple tele, by the way, or rather teloi, excuse me, even though tele, I was right. I was going to say tele is the correct plural. Even though they have multiple tele, um, if you can give an account of them that folds those various purposes into one account and has explanatory power for why the thing is what it is essentially, then you have hit upon a more important telos, more central telos that is in some sense more objective than the situation in which it happens to find itself.